Good evening, everyone. Thank you and welcome to tonight's DEI committee meeting. We're excited to have you here today, and we're excited to get underway with some really important things ourselves. We'll start off today's meeting with the pledge, so everyone can just take a moment. All right. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. So I will share into the meeting our agenda for today, just to make sure that everyone can see that easily and we have some access for it. Now this meeting has been called to order. We're going to go for our minutes approval from last meeting, from our September 22nd meeting. And so I'll wait on a motion for approval and second. All right, Nicole. And then Kelly, I saw your hand, Lee, as well. So, all right, wonderful. So we move past our minutes from last time. And again, for anyone watching at home, please feel free. We encourage everyone to watch the logs of our meetings, so you can see beyond just the summary. You'll also be able to watch our full meetings. So for our specific agenda today, we already have, introduced, and excited to go through that. Now, I'll stop right here just to show everyone a reminder for our meeting dates for each subsequent meeting moving forward. And this is just a moment that's important to highlight so that we can all have a consistent basis for what the days are. This is a Tuesday, but all subsequent meetings are going to be a Wednesday. So each one is going to start at 7. They're all in the same time constraints of about 90 minutes. And our next meeting after today will be November 17th. So we'll just stay consistent moving forward on Wednesdays. And to be clear, it's not always going to be the second or third Wednesday. As we can see, we have some that are a little bit earlier on as well, and some that there's some variance. But that's the first part of business. Does anyone have any questions about that? No? Okay. So moving forward, in regards to our open positions, I just wanted to update everyone on what we have, and we do have a new member who has joined us for tonight. So I'd just like to take a second to introduce Kim Blasiak to our community. Already seen her on the board, and just a round of applause.
Thank you.
We're very happy to have you here, Kim. We're excited for your insight and for the leadership that you bring to the table. So definitely looking forward to partnering and working with you moving forward. Dr. Wiles, just is there any updates in regards to what we've seen from the survey so far and what that process is looking like at the moment?
Sure. Thanks, Matt. So we communicated with all of our Guilderland employees a week ago, Monday, to announce that we had an opening for an employee to fill Nija Irway's position on the board on this committee. As you know, she moved out of the area. And then on Monday, last Friday, I did a reminder. So at this time, we have 2 letters from interested individuals who are interested in serving on the committee. The application period, if you want to call it that, closes at the end of the day on Friday. So we're on track to have a new person on the committee for our November meeting. The Board of Education will be in charge of selecting that individual. So we're right on track.
Excellent. Wonderful. And along the same veins, we also wanted to give an update on a conversation that we started last month in regards to member terms and what that might look like. In some, Dr. Horalchik, she sent out a Google form to committee members and is going to share those results with everyone this evening. So Dr. Horalchik, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure, thanks, Matt. We had 18 responses to the survey. About half the people that responded want to extend their term, and the other half have mixed results, with 6 people looking to complete by the end of this school year. There were some comments about students and teachers and whether we handle student and teacher terms differently, especially students as they go through, or whether we handle them the same as community members. I think one of the conversations, as it says in the agenda, that we're looking to have is about staggering terms, because the idea of getting a whole fresh new committee as we're just embarking on this work will really kind of put a halt to productivity and make us start and stop again every time the terms change. So, but as we look, if we're a 20-member committee with 6 members looking to end their term naturally by the end of this year, that seems like a really natural break to create that staggering of the terms. So we're just looking for some feedback from the members of the committee.
Nicole, then Gloria.
I just wanted to say that that does sound like a good start. It's about a third of the committee. So I think that is a pretty even, and I'm not a math person, but definitely a pretty even start to kind of circulate the membership. So great. I'm glad we got the response.
Gloria.
So that would mean we'd look at the 6 people this year, replace them, and then next year 6 more or 7, and then 7 the next time, because we're going to stay at 20. So that would mean 6, 7, 7.
Dr. Horalchik.
Sure. So what that would mean for this particular year, if we went forward in this direction, would be that we would give a specific date and ask people to let Deb Sim know that they would officially like to end their term at the end of this year, and then we would start the process of letting community members know, gathering interest, and going back to that process of selecting members to start in July. How do people feel about that process? It seems like we would ask people to let Deb Sim know about March. So, you'd have a couple months to really make that decision, and your progress, your term on the committee would still go into the whole school year.
Kelly.
I think that's great. I'm glad there's some turnover initially, but what would happen if we don't have 6 people there's a lot of people that are invested in this. Do we vote them off the island, or is it kind of, is there any thought to what happens if we don't have people interested in leaving next year? I assume we would probably, but just wondering.
Elizabeth.
Yeah, this is a little bit of a different subject. I was just wondering when Marie said that the Board of Education will decide about the applications or letters from the employees and stuff, and then I assume the board will decide about these new 6 and stuff. I think in an earlier meeting we had talked about whether this committee should have any input into, and I didn't think we had ever decided that question of who was going to pick. So some people had said, oh, the board should do it because they did it before. So then I thought we just kind of left it open or something. Did we decide that?
I don't think so, Elizabeth. I know the board officially appoints the members. So in the short term, because we want to get somebody on board to fill Nidra's place, I think in my mind, we just defaulted to the process that we had already used, but certainly I think this group can have some thoughts about that and go from there.
Yeah. Seema.
Sorry, I'm leaving my camera off. I was just wanted to respond to Elizabeth's comment that I think that would be a great idea. I don't know if we could do something where we get feedback, kind of unofficial or informal feedback from the committee, and then the board could just decide before appointing someone. And that way, there's so many different voices on the committee, so we would be able to hear, there's sometimes I don't realize until somebody else points out to me how that will impact maybe their building or their work. So that would, I personally think that would be great.
Okay. So members generally feeling like the way we want to do this is the committee, maybe we take a look at applications and we give some feedback. So take more of an advisory role to the board rather than selecting per se ourselves. Yeah. Okay. Barb?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea, but I do think it's a board responsibility. It's a board committee, so they should really, I think have the final say with input, from this group. So I think that's a good idea.
Do we want to use this process to fill this open spot now? Or is this going forward? Just so we can build in the steps in order to make it, so we have the new person on board as soon as possible.
Barb? You're muted.
I think we should use this process, what we've done before, just for this particular appointment. And then when we're, reviewing the 6 and all that, just from the time standpoint. So hopefully, we can get this person on board quickly.
Elizabeth?
Yeah, so I think it would be good if we have the time. It would be good to do the process that we're talking about with the compromise of input from the committee and then decision by the board. I think if we gave our committee a very short time, turnaround time, okay, you guys have 5 days to read these letters or whatever it might be, or 2 days, or those who have time to do it can do it and get it done by the deadline, and then the board can do their make their decisions. I think it doesn't have to slow it down a lot. Like somebody said, there's a lot of commitment on this board. So I think if you tell us, this committee, if you tell us, do it in 2 days, people will do it.
I wonder if this current cycle might be a time for us to nail out, as Dr. Wiles pointed out, some of the procedural steps of how this might look. And it might make more sense for us to do that while we're only trying to fill, 1 role or 2 roles, as opposed to trying to fill 6. Does that seem like that might work? Maybe we start this time with the new model, get that up and running, and then we'll be more efficiently set come springtime. Dr. Rivera?
I apologize. I forgot. What did Dr. Wiles say? When is the closing for the employee person responding with a letter of interest?
Friday.
This Friday?
Yes.
Okay. So, I mean, I don't see why I don't, like Elizabeth said, yes, it's the responsibility of the board to appoint, but, if we give an opportunity for people to look through the letters of interest and just give feedback, if people want to, they can. If they don't want to, that's fine. And I don't think it's going to slow it down much. I think it would be a good opportunity for the board to have the whole committee to have some input as to where this work is going. I mean, we're still at the infancy stage, so I think having more voices is helpful at this part.
I was just looking at meeting dates, so I don't know that we could make the October 19th board meeting, but we could certainly aim for the November 9th board meeting. And that would get the new person appointed in time for the November 17th meeting of this committee. So I think that'd work great.
Wonderful. So then we'll aim for that, to have everything set and make sure that any recommendations coming from this specific committee would be done certainly in advance. Do you want to say 2 weeks in advance of the November 9th board meeting? Does that seem like a reasonable timetable, if for closing this Friday, which is the 15th, 2 weeks in advance of the 9th would put us at the 26th. That gives us roughly a week and a half from close of applications to look things over.
That makes sense.
Perfect. All right, perfect. Are there any other thoughts on terms and what we want to do moving forward? Yes, Dr. Rivera?
Sorry, I didn't mean to be talking so much, but someone mentioned before about having a middle school student or maybe an eighth grade student as one of the student reps. And I don't know where we got to talking with that. And we hadn't talked about the length of the terms either. So that just might be something to think about because they're obviously going to be coming into the high school and they'll have some time to invest on the committee. So I didn't know what others thought about that.
Right. Dr. Hall, do you mind speaking into some of the other responses that came in terms of from what seemed to be students in regards to their term lengths?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So there was an open question to just share any ideas regarding member terms. And so other than, kind of the staggering, there was one idea that school staff and student members should be longer terms, alternating the end. There was another term to have teachers and students remain on the committee with longer terms. It is that group of individuals that are on the ground and in the buildings. If that is not possible, then I would encourage the leadership to consider a separate subgroup that includes those groups. There was another comment about using the end of the school year as an end of term, because there was a question about it, when would the end of term come, given that we started our meetings last year in December. But it looks like we've settled on the end of the school year being the end of June being a really natural break for that.
Mr. Laster?
I agree with Seema. I'd be in favor of creating some type of process where we can involve middle school students, whether that be formally on the DEI committee itself as a student representative or in any type of subcommittee. But I think there are definitely students that are ready to participate and could give some value to the conversation.
I'm also in support of that. I think that that's an incredibly valuable voice that we don't want to miss. Elizabeth?
Yeah, and it seems like a great experience for the kids, to get them thinking about this, directly involved in it. Seems like it's a win-win for everybody.
I wonder then if something we might be able to do if we're looking for more immediate access might be in the subcommittees and inviting middle school students into that. And maybe that's something we can discuss in our subcommittee meetings moving forward over the course of this next month. And Mike, would you mind being a point of contact for everyone for that? Just and we can share and we can.
Absolutely.
Maxine?
I think Dr. Hralchek said something about this in the feedback, but I think it would be a great idea if we had maybe like a student voice section or a student engagement subcommittee specifically for middle schoolers and the high school students on the board to be able to truly understand like what's going on in the school from a student perspective.
Maxine, are you thinking of partnering with the student voice committee that exists at the high school currently?
I don't think it has to, but I think that it would just be great to have a group of students who like want the same things, and at like the high school students would be able to like sort of guide them through this process, because I think that it would be great, especially for an eighth grader, to see what some of the older students are doing in the high school.
Yeah, Elizabeth?
Sorry, so Maxine, do you mean that we'd make like a new committee of student voices? Yeah?
Yeah, like a subcommittee sort of.
Yeah,
I mean,
subcommittee?
some of the middle schoolers might not even have to be on it. It would be like how community members are part of the subcommittees, but they're not like a listed member of this.
Mhm. Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, that'd be great. Um, yeah. It would be great too if we could like make some sort of a publication. I don't know if it would be like, a printed publication or maybe that's old fashioned, an online thing. But with, like we've talked about artwork and, poems and I don't know, there are people's stories and stuff that they would maybe be able to publish without any names, of things that they've experienced. I don't know. Maybe the students could also be involved in something like that, if we ever wanted to do something like that. I mean,
D,
Um, I was actually the one that put that comment in there. And as I thought about it in my head, some sort of leadership slash maybe student government type group, whether it's a club that doesn't necessarily have to meet at the same time as this committee. So that's kind of where I got the subcommittee idea. But maybe more of like a sounding board and shared experiences and some sort of advisory. This is what's going on at the middle school level, which would work well with the audit committee. But those were some of the things going through my head when I thought of that.
I saw some comments coming up about this in regards to mentorship, and Razad mentioned that that could be a really, really powerful way to connect and bridge high school and middle school students. This isn't specifically that you would have to answer this, Maxine, but just anyone. Would we want to? Will this be in addition to subcommittees that students are currently already on, or are we thinking that this is where all the students would be? I am absolutely totally pro student involvement and increased student involvement. I worry if you end up having one more thing, just the amount that might add to you. But I also think your voices are very powerful in all the different spaces you're involved in. So just what are some thoughts about that, Leah?
Well, mine was a little bit of a different question or thought, so I don't want to derail from what you just posed. Is it okay?
Go for it.
Okay. I was just gonna say too, I know a meeting structure like this is not gonna work for the little ones, but it would be great if we could, as part of this discussion, think about a way that we can familiarize the little ones in elementary school about the committee and work. So that by the time they're hitting middle school and high school, they know this committee exists and know this initiative is happening. So I don't really have ideas within a meeting structure or committee structure, but just kind of wanted to raise that. Maybe it's interaction a couple times a year, or the middle schoolers and the high schoolers coming to the elementary schools in small listening groups or something. I don't know.
And that's a fantastic idea. Kim and then D.
Just kind of following what Leah said, I'm thinking kind of an advocacy group, just an all over advocacy group where, especially at the elementary level, I agree that this would be a tough format for them to acclimate to. But yet, if there was something like that at the elementary school, like a specific advocacy group where we're bringing the information from this group within and kind of teaching them about what we're doing, but also at the same time providing them with an opportunity to find their voice, especially early on. So I think that would be really good.
I don't need to say anything. You took the words right out of my mouth. Somehow involving the littles, they're a passion for me, but I love, love, love the idea of bringing in the older kids, whether it's even considered community service or it's even recording themselves reading stories, or it's Google Meets during a time when their teacher. I could see the interaction working well and the younger kids really feeling like they have something important to offer too.
I'm seeing a lot of mention of collaboration with the engagement committee for this work. personally, I love this. This aligns very much with a lot of things that I'm personally interested in and would like to see happen anyway. So I think this is fantastic. I guess the question before us now is, um, as a committee, do we want to, and can we create a student voice committee tonight? Is that something that we want to do and have that notice be set moving forward? Yes. Is there anyone opposed or anyone who'd like to voice any cautionary reasons we might not want to do that? Okay. All right. So, all right. So moving forward, we'll also have a new student voice subcommittee. And this will be comprised of both high school and middle school students. We'll work together in our committees, but also again, everyone please reach out to Mr. Laster as a resource and as a support for bringing in those middle school voices as well. That's a really important piece. So was there anything else that we have for committee member terms? Anything like that? Yes, Elizabeth.
Should we talk about Kelly's idea of what are we gonna do, like draw the short stick or like, you know, get together to conspire against people to get them off the committee? What if nobody wants to leave? How are we gonna decide that? I think it's an interesting question.
My thought based off of what Dr. Halchik shared with the forum, it seems that we do have a decent number of people that are currently staggered for leaving at the end of this year and then for the following year, and some people may have wanted extended terms. So based off of what we have so far, it seems like we're naturally kind of moving in the progression of thirds. And that would kind of follow the role that, the Senate fills currently. So from there, once that pattern's established, it'll just naturally flow that way. So there won't ever be a need to fill 20 vacancies. And then it'll just be established, okay, your term is X to X once we have that first group that moved out. It seemed to me that that was the biggest part, is getting the first group set.
Do you think next year, like of the 12 that are still, or whatever it was, 14 that are still like left, will 7 of them naturally want to get off? Or what if they don't? What if like one person says, okay, I want to leave, and the other ones say, I still want to keep, you know what I mean? Should we just cross that bridge later?
Well, from what I saw, it seems as if there was some tendencies that it might not be as big of an issue. But again, that might change between now and then. So I don't want to say that it'll just be, unicorns and rainbows and pixie dust. But Seema?
Oh, yeah, just to Elizabeth's point, I think if I remember correctly in the steering committee, we were talking about hopefully, after people respond and let Deb Sim know about their intentions of staying or not, we would have a better or an accurate number of people staying and leaving. And like Matt said, just to get that first round of staggered representation, then we could go from there, establish a term, you know, limit, I guess, a term limit, and then rotate from there. But I think, I wouldn't want to try and vote anybody off or anything like that if people want to stay and work. So I think getting that first response from the group would be helpful, because we did talk about last year being not a full year. I think we had our first meeting, I think in December. It wasn't a full year, so it didn't feel like a full term, like school year. Um, and there was a lot of work at the very beginning, just putting the committee together. So I can see why people would want to stay and see some things through.
Leah?
I'm really excited to hear so many people are interested in staying so long. I did want to throw out, I hope we think about mixing up committee structures every year at least, to sort of shake that energy around. And I think also the committees can be a really easy way to keep people involved if their time is up or they want to be less involved or more. So maybe we just make sure we're weighting the committees every year so that we don't have the same people on the same committee forever, unless they just love that committee, I guess.
Yes, Elizabeth?
And maybe also, people, if they really wanted to stay involved and they didn't, they might, be okay with moving off of the main committee and just being one of those helpers on the subcommittees, like Leah was kind of like, that's what Leah was saying made me think of that. And also, yeah, it does seem like a really good idea to end it at the end of the school year, especially, with students and stuff, because if we have any students that are seniors, they're not going to want to continue for the next fall when they're off at college or something. So, yeah, so the end of the school year seems like a really good time.
Oh, fantastic. Are there any other thoughts on this topic? No. All right. So moving on to our reports from the subcommittees. We'll start with communications.
All right. So we worked on setting goals and going through some of the, so our two priority goals are, this was an idea brought up by Mr. Pinchinat, which was create student and staff profiles about teachers and students that are showing excellence in DEI work. We would love to have boost our website so that people can be able to see the work that we are doing, because the point was brought up that we can have a website, but if no one knows about it, then our work isn't going to be heard. So we want to work on creating examples of our slogan, which is be open, be fair, and build together. And that's one of our priorities. We want to make sure that people understand the work that we're doing so that it isn't misunderstood. Another thing that Mr. Genovese had brought up last year was a logo contest for our committee, so that we can have t-shirts, we can have a brand almost, so that people can see this image and they can know what we're about and some of the things that we stand for. We would love to involve students, so at any level, for like using the words or concepts, and then thoughts, pictures, art, and we would love to put it on our website, t-shirts, hats, things. If we ever have like events, they could be there. And then Mr. Genovese has a microaggression disruptive practice that he came up with that we're going to share now. So go ahead.
Yeah, well, this is based upon, first of all, some stuff in Kendi's book, but it's also something that's taught in corporations, in schools, in cognitive-based therapy and stuff. So if our theme is to be open, be fair, and build together, we want people to begin to recognize when they may be doing something that might not be as welcome to other folks as it might. And one way of doing this has to do with a mindfulness breathing exercise, where we could get people to relax, remember, and reflect. And it goes right back to the exercise in Kendi's books, and he uses it sort of in an awareness way, and almost a negative thing. Think of race, think of privilege, but we could turn that around into a positive thing, where people learn to inhale, hold it, and exhale slowly, be open. Just breathe, hold it, exhale slowly, and be fair, build together. It's almost an exercise you can use for classroom management. People can use it when they're in meetings, wherever they are, and they begin to feel upset or aggressive. All right, they would have the words to use it, and could use 3 breaths to disrupt the practice.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, and we could put a video out there or something, have some kids teach everybody how they work, and show them, do some little stories about it and stuff. Like, the last time, I saw so and so and I was about to say, but I stopped and took a breath and remembered to be open, to be fair, to build together, or whatever. And then if we could get teachers starting to use it as, in the beginning of the day, right? Or as a classroom management practice when stuff starts happening. I think it would be very helpful and get people really focused on where we want to go. And I believe the P2 program, the SEL program, the positivity program has mindful moments. So I can't see what they are and how they're doing them, but my suspicion is that it's very simple, very similar to this. So we might be able to coordinate it with that.
Absolutely. Elizabeth?
I just wanted to go back to Maxine's idea about the logo contest. And I think it sounds great. I mean, maybe we could even have it where we had one like design picked from elementary and one from middle school, one from high school. We could make all those different designs of T-shirts and stuff. You know, that could be neat. Because it would be hard if like elementary school students were competing against high school or something like that. So if we had one where each level would like there'd be a winner, you know, that could be neat.
Yeah, I really like that idea. I think that I think that we're coordinating this with Dr. Elliott as well, so she might have some input as to how that would work, but I'll definitely write that down in our notes.
Thank you. Um, just for some clarification on the back end, during this part, and I'll do this again, especially when we're in the learning component, I'll stop sharing when we have larger group discussions, just so we can see as many faces as possible. But I want to keep this every now and again so we can at least see where we're going. So for community engagement, I will share out what that subcommittee worked on and what we've determined as our priority goals of the immediate and then also going into the long term. The immediate goals are going to be to focus on the work of one of our subcommittees, which is really looking at a review of the curriculum. Now, this is such a wide angle thing that we're taking an all hands on deck approach. And so we're breaking it up into different chunks. Going into November, we're going to look at even just specifically with social studies, what does the K-8 framework say? And what are things that we know our students are being exposed to as per New York State? And then also what are some ways that Guilderland is going above and beyond in this regard? And then the following month, we're going to look at some of the high school framework and see how that plays out. And in conjunction, once we have a better grip of what it is that our students are looking at, then we're going to reach out to different building level administrators and IAs in order to get some more in depth, because that's where we're going to see the Guilderland specific touch beyond just, here's what the state says. We felt that it would not make sense for any sort of recommendations without a thorough understanding of what already exists and what's already taking place. So that's one of the first steps that we're looking at. And beyond that, I think one of our clear goals that we saw outlined earlier is to increase the engagement in all the different buildings and between buildings. So as we saw, highlighted the student voice community, I think that that's a natural partnership. So our approach is really leaning into something, not to get ahead with the learning component, but the idea that this isn't a sprint, that it's something that we want to make sure that we do this well, as opposed to just trying to make sure we have something to show. We want to make sure that we're educating ourselves in order to best support this work in the long term. Would anyone else from engagement like to add to that? Does that sum up pretty well what we feel? All right, wonderful. So the next group that we have is research.
I'll be reporting out for research. Hot off the press because we met yesterday, and we are down a committee member. So hopefully we can get some more people. We talked a little bit about what our plans were to be for this year as kind of the hired nerds. We were ready to research any topic for any committee. We thought about how we could support Matt with his work, if there are things we could do to gather information, as well as the audit committee. I think there's probably a lot of overlap. So we were hoping to meet with both Matt and with the audit subcommittee. Some last year we looked at a lot of different school districts and what curriculum they were doing, and we called different districts and interviewed them. some a topic we thought we could do that forever, but we kind of wanted something different. We thought about other topics, maybe some kind of research on advanced placement and different ways that different school districts manage advanced placement. Specifically, are there anywhere you don't have to like test in or be picked for it? Are there any districts where people just, if they want to take it, they can? We'll learn more about that. Alternatives to standardized testing. Those were some topics we threw out, but we're kind of interested in looking into whatever the rest of the committees would find helpful to do their work and make recommendations.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. And I'm looking forward to meeting and working with you as well. For our equity audit,
I don't know if, I think it was supposed to be Amy, but she left, so I'm obviously not prepared, but we talked a little bit about, the different ways of collecting data from the district and the types of questions that we'd want to know. And we were looking at what kind of data is, at our fingertips, where just quantitative data we could get from the district itself, and then having some potential focus groups. And then we also talked about some possible funds that we could use to have an external audit done, and where this subcommittee would be helping kind of be the liaison, because we're here, right? And that other, the outside group would not be here. So maybe we could be liaison for an outside group to do an audit, because it's so big, so time consuming. But that was just talked about, and, people were sharing their opinions on kind of the pros and cons of that. And I'm all for that, because it is a ton of work. And I feel like having an outside group would be helpful, because this is all based on our, volunteer free time. And so I'm not sure when that would get done. It would be a lot easier to make some decisions after having some data, and that would save some time. So that's my not prepared report.
yes, D.
I just found the notes where I wrote the goals that we discussed last week.
Oh, you're
And we have two of them noted that the first step and the first goal is data gathering, so quantitative, qualitative. And then by January, we hope to have established some focus groups and surveys that would address elementary, middle, high school, based on some of that data that we collect or feel maybe one focus than the other. And the second goal is for community involvement. And I didn't have any particular notes for that. So I think we probably just discussed welcoming others' opinions.
Yes, and kind of going alongside that, we also, and Dr. Very touched on this, but the idea that qualitative data and quantitative data work in concert with each other, and that stories are just as valuable as any sort of metrics that we might get. And with this work, arguably, they may even tell a more powerful story. Kelly?
Yeah, I'm super in favor of, if we have funds, having an outside agency come take a look, because that kind of takes out our own biases as well, and all kind of looks at it, from an outside, and maybe they've already have those metrics developed that we would be spending time doing as mostly non-professionals doing this. So I'm hugely in favor of that, and I think we spoke about it in our committee too. If that was the one, Marie, we were talking about, had a lot of meetings. There was some going on. The challenge would be finding a reputable organization, kind of, that we actually got good results from. But I'm hugely in favor of having an outside agency. It takes it out of us, puts into professionals' hands, and then we could work from there. But I think that should be the first thing we get done as soon as we possibly can, because then we know what direction to head. Thanks.
Yes, Dr. Rivera?
I just wanted to add that I think, not, Dr. Wells doesn't have to add this, but I think she had briefly talked about seeing presentations of outside agencies who have done this work at school districts. And so, I'm sure the superintendent's group could be a resource in terms of finding those groups, Kelly, that you were talking about.
I'm happy to jump in. A couple weeks ago, I was at the fall conference of the Council of School Superintendents, and they had a whole strand in the program around work, around DEI kind of work. And I was at one particularly well-done presentation by the Rush Henrietta School District. And they had a whole team of people from the district talking about the work that they did, but it was all predicated on a pretty thorough, I'll say it was a self-assessment. They just had help gathering the data, organizing the data, so that they could use that as the starting place for, you know, identifying problems or issues or concerns. And then that becomes the basis for saying, so what are our top priorities in the work we want to get done now? There are a number of groups out there who are good at helping school districts organize and gather their data. Ultimately, you know, they're going to ask us to do that, but this provides a repository and a framework to help us get it done efficiently and effectively, particularly around focus groups. When you're asking people to tell their story and to speak honestly, sometimes it's easier to say what you need to say to someone who is from the outside rather to, you know, someone that you have to work with the next day or whatever. So I'm happy to help with that homework. And Matt, maybe you and I can team up, or the committee, whatever anyone needs, I'm happy to help.
Absolutely. I definitely look forward to partnering on that. I think that would be a tremendous step for us. And it's really important even for transparency and things of that nature. Leah?
I think that's really important what you said, Dr. Wiles, about we are getting people's stories. Some people's stories could have elements of trauma. We don't want to re-traumatize people through the process of gathering data. And this is the kind of thing that deserves, professional touch and kind of the right therapeutic environment if we need it.
And that sounds to me like something we can definitely plan to explore, at least as an option. Seems like most folks are in favor of that. So that's something we can explore down the line and look in terms of what options that we might have moving forward. Now the final segment of our meeting will focus around our learning component. So coming into today, committee members all read pages 35 through 65 of our book, 5 Practices for Equity-Focused School Leadership. And we're breaking this up to manageable chunks and wanted to really go through and do each section justice rather than trying to lump too much together and not hitting on all the themes. Because this section in particular was very, very rich. There were a lot of powerful visuals that I think can certainly be beneficial for everyone, both on this call and anyone watching the live stream. So what were some gut thoughts? What were some of those things that really jumped out to people from the jump? And we'll get some of the pause and reflect questions later, but there were just, I'm sure, a lot of things. Yeah, Andrew.
Yeah, so this whole thing is about preparing, okay? And I've got a lot of years in organizational change management, and there has to be a readiness. We have to really focus on getting people ready to do this kind of work. And really, on page 42, there's this thing about you must commit to being open to ongoing learning for the rest of your career, but you must commit to being open, which exactly is our first diversity thing, be open. Right. So I think we need to really think about this readiness preparation thing. So, I've seen so many times where people have great programs, but their organization wasn't ready for it, or they didn't make sure they were ready, or make sure that good segments of the organization was ready. So we really got to make some pay some attention to all of this stuff to make sure that we're working people and it doesn't hit them, in the wrong way. And it goes back to, what this notion of people telling their stories. We don't want to get them re-traumatized. We have to make sure that everyone who is encountering this stuff has a sense of readiness and support to get through it.
I'll read Elizabeth's comment, just because I know if you're watching live stream, it fleets by. With COVID, are we still ever having school assemblies? Matt and a few members of the DEI committee visiting the elementary schools and talking to all the kids could be great in terms of introducing the committee's work. And it could also be helpful in making kids from all kinds of marginalized groups feel suddenly more valued.
I know at the middle school, we're minimizing trying to bring large groups of students together, but I think that there's other mediums to send messages to students right now. TV news, Loom videos, so there's lots of ways we can push things out.
Yeah, Leo.
So to the learning component portion, I feel bad because I text Stima like 8 times a week, like, I love this book, it's so amazing. And I think this book is just phenomenal. And the thing I really highlighted in this time that I thought was just so powerful for the work that we're trying to do was this idea around race neutrality and intersectionality. And Professor Crenshaw's work around intersectionality and kind of the compounding impact of a person's marginalized identities with the very different examples there at the front. I thought that was a really great bridge builder to working across lines in our group, and kind of that the combinations that everybody can have some privilege, everybody might have some disadvantages, and the intersectionality is a really helpful tool in finding some common grounds, and stop that defensive knee-jerk reaction of, well, I've had a hard time, why are you saying I'm privileged? It's many factors. I really liked that.
I agree, and I actually see a bridge between that and what Andrew mentioned earlier in terms of being open to the work. Kind of preceding the part that Andrew quoted, the text mentions that, given the rapid rate of information generated and historical and entrenched nature, that's why it's so important for us to, one, understand that this is a process and not something where we need to just feel the need. And I know there's a lot of internal pressure on every single person on this committee. We wouldn't have joined it if this wasn't something that we were inherently really passionate about. But there is a large amount of pressure to just right every single wrong. And it's important for us to, in that zeal, to not end up creating new obstacles and new barriers. And to the point of privilege, an analogy that I've always used, I say always, since really I've engaged in conversations surrounding privilege, the analogy I like to use is it's like climbing Mount Everest. So if we look at life that way, that no matter who you are, that's a really, really hard thing to do. That's impressive. And there's a reason that, people when they're taking pics for Instagram aren't like, hey, top of Mount Everest, it's because that's a really hard thing to do. And so whether you have all the right equipment, whether you have a team with you, it's challenging. Now, privilege might mean that you have the right gear. Privilege might mean that you have a team with you. Privilege might mean that you have, a tent that you can stay in, as opposed to trying to just go and free face the mountain with your hands and feet. And so it's hard, even with the different advantages that we might have in life. But it's important to understand privilege doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't make you evil. And I think that kind of demystifies it and allows it to be something that we can all start to open ourselves to. Yeah, Elizabeth.
Yeah, about privilege, yeah, coming off of what you said, Matt. Yeah, I liked in the book when it said that privilege is something that everybody should have, it's like everybody getting the stuff that they like. Every privilege is something that everyone should have, I guess is what it said. So like I sort of read that, interpreted that to like when I think of privilege, one of the most immediate things I think of is like if I get stopped by the police, I don't have any concern whatsoever that I'm going to get murdered. I got no concern that I'm going to get killed in this encounter. Zero. I know I'm not going to get killed. And you know, privilege, that's white privilege. But it's not saying that I'm a bad person for having that privilege, but it's saying that Black people should have that too. They should also have zero expectation that they're going to get killed for jaywalking or running a stop sign or whatever it might be. So yeah, I think that was really interesting. That definition of privilege. It's what we want for everybody to have, you know.
I'm gonna pose a question to you from that first pause and reflect section. Something that stood out to me is something that maybe many are feeling even right now. It says take a moment to sit with any discomfort and disappointment that we might feel. And so, what happens with that? What do we do with that discomfort? What do we do with that tension that, you know, it may not sit right, acknowledging, oh man, wow, I might be privileged in this way. Or if you did end up taking any of the implicit association tests and seeing, no way, I have a like, how do we move forward with that? How do we handle that? Gloria.
I did do some of those association tests, which I found fascinating. And you're right, my immediate reaction was sometimes disappointed. Like I wanted it to say something else and it didn't say that. And I thought, where'd that come from? And then I started to think, what else am I not aware of? And that really sat with me a long time. And I'm still thinking about it, I think, there's so much probably in the unconscious, like he talked about those things that are deep, that worry me that might be there. And then how do you surface them and what's going to happen when I surface them? How do I deal with that? So there was a lot of emotional reaction to those, to that section.
Mr. Laster?
Well, in response to the pause and reflect question, a little bit later on page 44, the author suggests that our ability to recognize those opportunities and moments of cognitive dissonance, while maintaining and keeping in check the normal defensive sort of response, will make us more effective in this work. So when I think about the discomfort, I think about how am I going to react and how am I going to not become defensive, but recognize that cognitive dissonance that we've created. So.
Yeah, Seema.
I think I don't remember who I was talking to, but I had done the implicit bias test for gender, and I was surprised with my results. I ended up being somewhat sexist towards females, and I was kind of disappointed in myself. And so whoever I was talking to, it was a good reminder to not, it wasn't like a judgmental thing that like, oh, you're a bad person because this is what you scored or you have bias. It's just that we all do. And just kind of like what Mr. Lasser was talking about, just to recognize that and kind of sit with that. And what Gloria mentioned too, what else, I only took that one particular one, but what other biases that I have. And again, doesn't make you a bad person, but we are human and we're part of a society. So everybody does. There's no escaping having biases. I feel like that is, one thing that can help kind of normalize things for people, that this is not only certain groups of people have biases, everybody does.
Yeah, Leah.
Something sometimes people can be surprised to know is, I definitely feel a lot of privileges. I feel the privilege of being a light-skinned Black woman, a Black woman who was raised very well off, got to go to Ivy League schools, and I'm fairly comfortable in recognizing that privilege doesn't make me a bad person, but I'm also very comfortable in realizing that if I'm among fellow Black people who have had different experiences, I need to pipe down and listen sometimes. Um, and that's again not to say I don't feel guilty about it or bad about it or sad about it. I just sometimes know I've got blind. Not I liked actually I liked how this book said not to use the word blind as a negative word. So I have short-sighted spots, and I think sometimes people who have not kind of had that discomfort so long, it feels very new and uncomfortable and guilt-inducing. But as someone who's had to kind of navigate that within my community my whole life, you can get past it, and it can become a pretty comfortable, humble place to be. So I just wanted to share that.
Kelly.
I absolutely love the implicit bias tests, all of them. Like I've taken them for years now, like with different organizations, and it doesn't change. Like, like I embarrass them. Like they're so embarrassing to me sometimes. I'm like, I'm prefer white faces like 98% of the time. Like to me, that's like, it doesn't even mean anything. That's the thing. It doesn't mean one thing or another, but it shocks me every time because I acknowledged that years ago, and then it continues to come up that way, and I'm like, what, why? And it's just crazy to me. So it doesn't even change. You can't change your implicit bias. That's what I'm just kind of like realizing, and stop making it mean anything, and just acknowledge it and change your behavior around it. So it really, like, I love those tests so much. So if anybody hasn't taken them, take them all, take them often or every couple of years, and you see that you just don't change no matter what you do. It's interesting for me personally.
Maxine.
I really appreciate the point that Leah made. I think that we can get hung up on the things we don't have instead of appreciating the things we have. And also, I think that there's a lot of different types of privileges. This book brings up a lot about playing oppression Olympics. And I think that instead of doing that, we should do what Leah said, which is listen to the people around us when we are trying to learn from each other.
Kind of going alongside that same vein, Maxine, quoting my mother, who's a very, very wise woman, something that wouldn't make sense if someone stubbed their toe, like we wouldn't tell them, no, it doesn't hurt. And so it's interesting that we do that a lot with other situations in life, and that we might say, well, no, you just don't understand what's happening, or, yeah, well, you don't get really why, or is that really how it happened? No way they really said that. Do they mean it? Maybe you're just being sensitive. And so those kinds of responses where I would say, not only diminish people's experience, but also diminish their identity, that's where I think it can become dangerous. And I think that's part of the reason why it's so important to understand what are our implicit biases. These are the things that are implicit, they happen subconsciously. And having a better understanding of that will help us to be able to better temper and give us just that little bit of pause before we give our gut reaction to things. And I think even just along the veins of what forms our implicit bias, from the moment that we're born, the first things that we see in the world, that shapes how we view a lot of different professions. I mean, if I said, close, your eyes and picture a doctor, is the doctor that you pictured, are they a person of color? Are they male? Are they, female? Are they non-binary? Like, what are the images that we have when we think of different professions? If I say professional, what are they dressed like? And so all of these different things that we have as associations, that's how our minds work. We learn by building connections to things. And something that always stands out to me is teachers and everyone who works with schools, we ask students all the time to embrace discomfort. Coaches do that with their athletes, to embrace that discomfort, that's learning process. But I've seen a lot of the time as adults, we almost want to shy away from it, almost like it's embarrassing to admit we have flaws. And I'll say here today, I am certainly not without flaws. And being a lifelong learner, that's the goal that we have for all of our students in this district. I know that for a fact. And I think that that also should apply to our community members and to our staff and to faculty and to all those that, play a role in educating our students. Now, I'm curious about one thing, and I just wanted to make sure that we dedicated at least a little bit of time to looking at it. Between page 58 and 59, there are a lot of terms and definitions specifically surrounding race, surrounding identity, and surrounding prejudice, bias. I found it particularly interesting that addressed in this afterwards. So there's race, racism, systemic racism, internalized racism, cultural racism, prejudice. And then there's white, there's black, there's people of color, BIPOC. And I think that all those definitions are really interesting. What were some of the responses that people felt, looking at this section and kind of digging into that? Yeah, Kim.
Yeah, just kind of tying it in with what we just spoke about, when I read through the definitions, I kept going back to the what, why, and how from the section that we were just going through, where every time I would read a definition, because I did those tests as well, and some of them I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. And then I thought, okay, well, I'm extremely uncomfortable right now. So it means I'm going to learn something. I'm going to open my mind, what, why, how. And then these definitions just kind of tied that in for me, where I was able to delve a little bit deeper into it and really kind of have that awkward moment and sit with it for a while.
Yeah, Dr. Wiles.
My eye kind of fell to the systemic racism piece, because, we are a school system, and it begs the question, to what extent do we have systemic racism built into our system? And are we aware of it? Are we willing to confront it? Do we even recognize it or see it? And it's almost like it'd be really cool if we could do like a that survey we all talked about, the anti-bias measure. How do you do that systemically? I mean, I know we talked about bringing in a consultant to do it, but I don't know, it just struck me that we're working so hard, and we may have our own, I can't call them blind spots, but places where we're not seeing us as we really are as a school system, which I guess is the whole reason why we have this committee in the first place. But that one jumped off the page for me.
Elizabeth?
Yeah, responding to what Marie said, yeah, it seems like, I think the book said somewhere, but I can't find it right now, that, any organization that exists within a society is going to be influenced by the society. It's going to reflect the same systemic racism that the society has. So just like we took the bias test and didn't pass, the school district is also going to no doubt have areas where, it doesn't pass there where systemic racism is reflected somehow that we can't necessarily even see. So, I think it's for sure it's going to be in there. And I thought in those definitions, the white one was kind of interesting because it mentioned that point about how like white people don't want to be called white. Like they just want to feel like, we just want to feel like whiteness isn't really a thing. So it's okay for white people to say, oh yeah, two black people walked in the room. But if people say about us, two white people just walked in the room, we feel like, wait a minute, I'm not just a white person. I'm like I'm an interesting person with this experience, like we want to be individuals. We don't want to be seen as just white people, makes us feel devalued or something. We're not comfortable with being called white people, but we're fine with calling all sorts of other people, all sorts of other labels, because we think that's normal. But whiteness is supposed to be the default, and it's not supposed to be noticed, and it's not supposed to be mentioned. It's almost close to like a taboo or something, unless you're one of those like white supremacist groups and then they talk about it all the time, but that's a different thing, you know?
Yeah, just a bit. Gloria.
I just want to go back with what Marie was talking about, because when you mentioned, Matt, the systemic racism piece, what came to my mind was the that podcast, that study of Southlake in Texas. And what it brought to mind was how at the beginning, the community itself and the school district, you know, was most of the people were in denial that anything even was wrong. And what it took were voices, very courageous voices that came forward to describe experiences that nobody was aware that other people were having in their schools. And once they heard those, then it became, okay, those that wanted to listen and those that were like in denial and stayed in denial. That couldn't be the way it was. You know, you misinterpreted or whatever. And that's what it brought to mind to me, their whole struggle with that. Once it was out there, how does the community react, and how do we expand the understanding of a community beyond ourselves?
Leah, and then Joe.
One word I'd like more help understanding over this year in our work is, how do you say this word? Biopic? BIPOC. Yeah, that I feel like a total Generation X, like old person, not cool, because I don't get it, and to me, I don't understand like why I would define myself out not with fellow Asians or other people of color. I don't understand the term, and so I'm hoping to learn more about it this year, because it was coined for a reason. And it's very popular for a reason, and I hope we can do some learning around that this year.
Joe?
As I was reading this chapter, and I mean, confession, I read, you know, the whole book, but the as the thing that seems to emerge to me is that as we discuss these things, and they talk about whites tend not to be seen as representatives for their entire race and things, it's as evidence that things aren't a big happy meritocracy keep emerging. That's one of the really threatening things to people's egos. And that's when the conversations kind of start to shut down, right? Is when that kind of starts to come to the surface.
So it sounds like you're touching on the ideas earlier on that mentioned equal and equitable. And,
Yeah.
you know, those are not the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One of the questions from the pause and reflect section of this particular portion of our reading, that I know it may evoke some discomfort, but I think it's important for us to address. It's the first question. It says, what has been your experience learning about and discussing race and racial injustice? I'm thinking, Leah, even just your mention of, you know, Gen X, I think about myself, millennial, I think about my younger siblings, Gen Z, and how there's a distinct difference, even in terms of how things were approached when I was in school versus how things are approached now. And so how all of our different ways we've approached and learned things, how much that may and has shaped our implicit bias. How has race been talked about? Is it something that folks would say, you know, has been viewed as almost a taboo? You don't talk about it, and like, well, yeah, it just doesn't matter to me. Some of the character profiles, you know, where I don't really see color and race blindness. Was that kind of the experience for many here? Andrew, then Joe.
So I grew up until I was 12 in New York City. And in my elementary school, my two best friends, one was a Hasidic Jew and the other was a black guy. And what was so interesting was when we were alone, we were just friends and we did stuff all around. But when we went into each other's homes, all of this crazy stuff that we couldn't understand was happening. Like, well, Brian, his mom would say, Andrew, you need to be real careful coming here because he lived in the projects down there, right? And I lived in a separate house. And, and Craig, who was the Hasidic Jew, he lived like in a sort of a communal place, right? And it was strange because then I moved, from New York City out to Long Island to a community very like Guilderland, right? And then I started getting taught about why these other people, okay, were different and why they were a problem. And people would start speaking to it and explaining the nonsense. So I didn't realize I had a problem where there were differences and all this stuff until I moved to the, a Guilderland type, Oceanside it was, on Long Island. Whereas, and I never got to see Brian or Craig ever again. I would have been interested to hear what their experience had been, if they had moved in different places, or what. So even looking back at it now, let's see, I'm almost 70, right? I look back and I say, oh my God, I didn't have a clue about what was going on. And then a lot of what, I learned after that and that I rebelled against because it was after all 1965, 66, 67, 68. And that put me down a certain path about categories and how we use categories for all kinds of stuff and how we act on categories rather than sitting with them for a second. And what were the questions? The who, what, why, when, where questions, and that's how I got into the whole mindfulness stuff where you would recognize it. And, so when this stuff comes up, that's when you want to, like Kendi does, take a breath and say, aha, racism, aha, systemic prejudice, or whatever. I'm still uncomfortable about those years, so many years later.
Thank you for sharing and for really opening up like that. Joe?
I definitely remember when I was younger, colorblind was the goal. It was like held up as like the ideal of where we needed to arrive at. That if everyone would just not see color, that was some kind of an answer. And luckily I learned other things soon enough. And as I was thinking back on that, like as I was learning, no, let's not do it that way. Let's see everybody and not see things about them. It was when I realized, oh yeah, only white people were saying colorblind was the goal. Oops, sorry.
Elizabeth.
Right, and the book points out, just like for the sake of the community, if anybody is watching this, the book points out that the idea of colorblindness, what's wrong with it is that it assumes that being black or brown or whatever the color might be that you're trying not to see, that there's something wrong with it. Like, so, it's because there's something wrong with it that we don't want to see it, we want to be blind to it. And there isn't, it's the diversity is a great thing. So diversity should be the goal, so color blindness is not the greatest idea because everybody brings their own unique experience that should be valued, ability, disability, sexual orientation, all of those things can create a rich tapestry, to use a cliche. But so color blindness is not the goal, I think the book is saying.
Mirzad?
Just like thinking back to what Mr. Genovese was just talking about, I think that a big point we can take away, no matter like if we're still learning now and whatever it might be, is that we're always going to end up being products of our environment and like what we surround ourselves with, the school system, our friends, our household, whatever it might be, like what we read, what we watch. All of that's simply going to influence us. And especially like at a young age, like Mr. Genovese is talking about his childhood, like we've all heard the expression, like kids are like sponges. We take it whenever we see. So I think that especially going forward, and Mr. Genovese was lucky enough to like notice the differences in what he was seeing while he was living in New York City versus, versus a more suburban landscape of Long Island. So I think that as we definitely look forward, a lot of what we have going on for us and what is to come for us is due to like what is around us. And if we really are trying to shape away from that, we have to take steps forward individually.
Leah.
I promise I won't talk anymore, but it just seemed like a really good point to bring up this great part of the book that I highlighted, like, and circled and put a sticker next to. Consider that being black is as natural as and good as being white, that using a wheelchair is as natural and positive as walking, that worshiping in a temple is as natural and positive as worshiping in a church or not worshiping at all, that speaking Spanish, Somali, or Hmong is as natural and positive as speaking English. And I just thought that was like a great goal for our committee. Like to help kids get to that point would be such a success. Just that they see the positives of the difference and not as a burden would be really exciting to me.
Andrew.
Yeah, I've been doing mindfulness stuff for too many years, and this gets back into what Leah's saying, into this dualistic thinking. Okay, it's either this or it's either that. Either this is great or that is great, but not both. And we've got to fight this dualistic thinking on this stuff that, this whole world has all of this stuff that's paradoxically good and paradoxically true.
Yeah, that excerpt really should be the kind of flag we wave back and forth. I think it's phenomenal. As we're winding down in just our last few minutes here, I'll leave with two final of the pause and reflect. One maybe for us to talk about a little bit. Another one really just for everyone to sit with and to think about and revisit. It's not one that I think anyone necessarily should answer here because it is one of those things where I think it's internal work. The internal work question being, where have you seen racism and racial prejudice in yourself? And I think that's one where I think that's important for everyone here as well as everyone at home to really just think about that for a second. And I really honestly am not trying to find the answer to that. I think it's important and the value of it comes from us being able to recognize it. So I just wanted to give voice to that question because I think that as we sit here, and I want to be clear to you, myself included. So I'm not saying that I'm excluded in some way as a Black man. That means I can't have racial prejudice. I think that, it's important for us all to think about that and like really truly evaluate it. But the last part being that understanding that a foundation for equity involves taking this on. That's the work of this committee. And so in our experience, where have we seen, heard, and felt interpersonal, systemic, internalized, or cultural racism that impact the students of colors, or family, or their communities? And does that align with data? And I kind of shared my opinion on this earlier that the stories that we hear are incredibly important and that it's more than just the numbers. But I mean, how does everyone else feel about that? Do we think that? And I think they do work in concert with one another. But do we think that the stories that have been shared are reflective of the total number of stories that have happened? I guess is one way I can word that. Yeah, Joe.
Pose it one more time, please, Matthew.
So do we think that the stories that have been shared so far, so my mind goes to last year, the young women in our community came forward and shared their experience at Guilderland. The stories that we heard from students at the anti-hate rally. do we think that those types of stories are more isolated in nature? Or do we think that, and that the data we have currently captures that? Even, I'm talking even looking at suspension rate, or do we think that there's more that we're gonna find beyond the numbers? Yeah, Kim.
Oh, I think there's definitely, we're going to find more beyond the numbers. I mean, even just going out into the community and having conversations with people where their story may not be public, we may not have heard it, but they have a story. So I think the stories, I mean, the data is always relevant, but there are always more stories out there. There's always more. And there are always people that it's hard for them to find a voice. So that's where I stand.
Seema.
I was just going to mention one of the classes I teach is action research, and a lot of my grad students find out only then, that there's qualitative research even exists. I think we're in like a traditional mindset where only quantitative research matters, and that's what actually counts. And it doesn't really give the complete picture. I mean, it obviously gives context, but especially when we're talking about people and humans, without that story, it doesn't really portray it to the same extent that we would like. So I think it's a great experience for people to also learn that both of these matter. They both have a place. It's not one over the other. It's just, we learn different things from both kinds of data. So I think I mentioned it before, the anti-hate rally to me was eye-opening. I know racism happens everywhere, but to hear those students, they were so brave to go up there and speak like that. That just really was moving to me. And I'd never seen anything like that here. I think I've mentioned before I went to Guilderland. So this to me I was just totally inspired. These students are awesome.
Absolutely. I could not agree more with that. Yes, yes. All the laurels, all the praise, all the flowers for our students. Yes. Yeah, I mean, that's one constant. They will always, knock our socks off. Barb and then Elizabeth to wrap us up.
I just wanted to say that I think if we could allow our students to have more forums such as that rally, and going down to the middle school as well, because what we need to see is student experiences, but we have to give them a forum to share those or express those. And so if somehow or other we could establish something along those lines, I think that would be far more helpful than paying $65,000, $70,000 or whatever for a consultant to come in. We have our own stories. We have our own things that may have happened in our district that we should know about. And, it's a small starting point, but at least it's a starting point.
Yeah. To that point, Barb, real quick, I know it's 8:30, so I'll speed say this, but I think that the greatest impact from the anti-hate rally came that it was student generated, student led, and student run. And I just think that that's a piece that we can't lose, that the power really came from the students and using their voice. It wasn't something that any of us really try to orchestrate or say, all right, now tell your stories. It was them deciding this is something we want to do. And so I think that that is absolutely essential. Elizabeth, final comment, and then we'll adjourn.
Okay, so I don't want to bring this down and also I really want to concentrate on the idea that the book, as the book said, racism isn't just about individual acts of meanness. It's about things that are entrenched, that are learned over a large amount of time, from the society that you live in. So a lot of them are invisible and implicit, but at the same time, like Matt was asking, are there other stories? I have a friend who, her daughter is in 7th grade, and her daughter this week was on a FaceTime with a classmate, and the classmate's brother and cousin walked by the computer. So my friend's daughter is, half white and half African American, and the other households, older brother and cousin walked by, and they said, "Oh, who's that?" And they started up a little conversation. Who's that person on the computer? And next thing my friend's daughter knew, she's in 7th grade. These boys were in high school. They were calling her a slut and the N-word. So these are Guilderland High School students, and this is a Guilderland Middle School student. So it is going on. It's not just those girls who talked about their experience before, but it's still going on. So My friend was happy with the middle school's response. She talked to a house principal who reached out to the boy's family, and she's happy that that's been done. And so hopefully now it doesn't go any further. But anyway, just, I don't want to bring it down in the sense of, but there are still individual acts of meanness too. It isn't just, implicit. So I'm sure there are many more stories where that one comes from.
Thank you for that, Elizabeth. And I'm really thinking of a way to give us another lift upwards as we wrap. But I think it's a reminder of where we have to go. All right, final comment, Gloria, then we'll wrap up. You're on mute. Oh, Gloria, you're still muted. Still muted.
We can't hear you. No.
I can't mute
Oh
you.
no.
Yeah. Well, I think honestly though, the inspiration comes in that is more fuel for us to see the importance and the very pressing nature of this work that we're doing. That it is important, it does matter, and it directly impacts the students that every person on this call cares about deeply. So let this be a reminder, when the nights feel long, that this work matters. With that said, we'll look to adjourn. Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting? Thank you, Mirzad. Second, Maxine. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate it.